I'd like to start with, well, I will now call our local government and housing committee meeting to order. It is June 14th and the time is 4:02. And the first item of the agenda is the roll call to determine quorum. And Tracy, if you could take that away.
Yes, Madam Chair, it'll be Maria.
Oh, Maria, sorry about that.
No problem. We messed you up with the cheat sheet.
All good.
Miss Aldine. Here. Mr. Aguilar. Ms. Faustinos. Mr. Friedrich.
He said he's online.
I am here just in time. Thank you.
Ms. Gustafson.
Here.
Ms. Hill.
Here.
Ms. Lane. Here. Mr. Rice. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Great. I will now go over the remote and in-person meeting rules for today. For the members of the public who are joining us remotely, to observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov under calendar header. Click on local government and housing committee hybrid meeting for June 14th. There you will find a link to the public webinar hosted on Zoom. To address committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking raise hand at the bottom of your screen and the appropriate agenda for the appropriate agenda. With your hand raised, you will be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you have used the dial-in number to join us by telephone, you can also dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. And then to remote committee members, which I think we're half in person and half remote at this meeting. If you wish to speak, please also raise your hand in Zoom and you'll find the hand icon on the bottom of your screen. And since I am chairing this meeting remotely, if the folks in the room could speak up, or if staff could tell me when folks want to speak, and if I have missed them, I would really appreciate that. And then the remote committee members may not use the chat box to make any comments or to have sidebar conversations. Please, everyone, remember to mute your mic unless speaking to cut down on microphone noise. And finally, I would like to ask that all remote members turn on their cameras if they were able. Members of the public who have joined us in person, please raise your hand at the appropriate time for public comment and you will be called to the front to speak. The committee members who are in person, please raise your hand. Like I said, if you could speak up actually and speak clearly into the microphone. And if you are viewing the webinar on a personal computer, please ensure that your microphone and speakers are turned off to prevent audio feedback in the room when you're not speaking. So the second item on our agenda here is the approval of the agenda. Is there any changes to the agenda for staff?
No, Madam Chairman, there are no changes.
Okay, we will deem the agenda approved as posted. And we will now move to our approval of the minutes. And this is item 3. We have a set of minutes from September 28th, 2022. Do any members of the committee wish to make a change on the minutes?
Madam Chair, I believe it's September 28th. Is that not
Excuse
correct?
me. Yes, September 28th,
Okay.
2022.
No, I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Great, thank you, Ms. Aldine. May I have a second? Oh, we don't do a second. I'm sorry about that.
I would if I could.
Okay, anyone object? Do we need to do a roll call vote of that, staff?
No, you do not. You just need to do by acclamation. So we need to have a motion and ask for a vote.
Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes from September 28th, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing
I
none.
will abstain, Madam Chair, as I was not part of this group back then.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lane. And next up, we have election of chair and vice chair. This is agenda item 4. Before we get into this item and our presentation for the day, I'd like to turn it over to John Hester to give some background on the committee because I know we have new members. So John, do you mind just giving us a little bit of background before we get into the election?
Happy to do that. because we have new members and it's been some time since we met, I just kind of want to refresh you. I think that would be helpful before you get a volunteer to be chair. As those of you who have been on this committee for a while know that after the regional plan update in 2012, a much stronger or larger role for local governments was created. And we created the local government committee to see if there were items of common interest that some of which were things you wanted to address through TRPA, some of which weren't. You may recall we've dealt with issues like refuse, spare boxes, vacation home rentals, and so forth. Oftentimes, those were just meetings to share information among the jurisdictions about what you were doing. When Bill Yates was chairman, he added housing. It used to be just a local government committee. He added housing. So this committee has been presented with a lot of the housing information, because a lot of the implementation happens through the local governments, through your housing authorities or through your housing staff. This committee on the housing front complements the Tahoe Living Working Group, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, which you chartered the APC to head, and Brendan Ferry, who I see walked in, who's chair of the APC, is also chair of the Tahoe Living Working Group. We have four local government, four members of the governing board, two from this committee on that working group, as well as realtors and environmental groups and a broad range of folks that have been involved in housing, and you'll hear a little bit about their role in the information that's being presented. But back to this committee, its focus recently has been housing, but can be anything that deals with local governments. And you have two ex officio members, Secretary Aguilar and Belinda Faustinos. So with that background, if I can answer questions, or Julie or John to help, we'd be happy to. Otherwise, I think we'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair, for the elections.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ms. Gustafson.
well, can I just beat you to the punch and suggest that I nominate you to continue as chair and Mr. Friedrich to be the vice chair of this esteemed committee?
Thank you. I really appreciate that nomination.
As do I.
Okay, and I will accept. I don't know, are there any other nominations by the board?
Madam Chair, I move to close nominations.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Zaldine. So with a motion for Hill as chair and Friedrich as vice chair, we need to now go to public comment on this item. Is there any public comment? Please raise your hand now if you're in person, or click the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or by dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member.
Madam Chair, we have no one in the room and we have one hand raised. And Doug Flaherty, if you'd like to
Great.
go ahead and committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Not sure what Mr. Marshall has decided regarding open meeting law violations, but this particular agenda item violates the Nevada open meeting law, since it failed to include the required OML wording describing this agenda item as for possible action. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Do we need to respond to that?
The agenda item is agendized for action. Mr. Flaherty is taking issue with the fact that we often do not say the exact words that the Nevada open meeting law would have us say, which would be for possible action. But it provides the necessary indication to the public that this is an action item. So there's no violation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Yes, thank you for the clarification. And so I will close.
Madam Chair, we have one more hand raised. Actually, she has put her hand down. So no more public
Okay.
comment.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. So I will close the public comment, and we have a motion on the floor for Hill as chair and Friedrich as vice chair. Can we please do a roll call vote on this?
Ms. Aldine,
Yes.
Ms. Faustinos, Mr. Aguilar,
Yes.
Ms. Gibson,
Yes.
Ms. Hill,
Yes.
Mr. Friedrich,
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Price, Ms. Lane.
Yes.
Okay, Madam Chair, motion passes.
Thank you very much. I'm honored by the nomination, and I really look forward to serving as your chair with Vice Chair Friedrich. On to planning matters, we have housing amendments, including proposed changes to height, density, and coverage for multifamily housing and accessory dwelling units. And the information on this item can be found on page 9 of your packet. As a reminder to the public, after the committee discussion on this item, you may raise your hand in person to be called on, or in Zoom to be unmuted by TRPA staff to share your comments. And I will now pass this item to Ms. Fink to introduce this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Karen Fink, Housing Program Manager for the TRPA. And before I turn it over to Alyssa Bettinger and our consultants from Cascadia Partners, I just wanted to highlight a couple of key points that you'll hear in the presentation today and the current proposal. So one of the things that we're trying to show today is what really contributes to the cost of housing for our local communities. So we received quite a few public comments prior to this meeting, and as many of the public comments pointed out, our system is currently really set up to make it much easier to build luxury condos than it is to build the type of housing that we need to support our local communities. So community members aren't seeing the type of developments come forward that they feel are appropriate for their communities. And we need to change that. But to do that, we really need to understand what prevents the construction of the housing that we want to see. So that's the main thing that we're going to discuss today. And today's proposal has emerged from our work with the Tahoe Living Working Group. This is phase 2 of that group's 3 identified housing priority actions. And what our proposal is doing today is really focusing on how we can reduce costs to build projects using bonus units. So those bonus units are oriented towards our remaining approximately 1,300 deed restricted development rights that are set aside to ensure that we can provide housing for our low income, moderate income households and working households that make more than moderate income. So these are our workers, our families, our seniors, and these are primarily folks that are either commuting into the basin now or are already living here in substandard conditions, overcrowded conditions, or are overpaying and so are in a kind of insecure housing situation. And then finally, before I turn it over to Alyssa, I just wanted to talk briefly about where we're headed after this phase. So one of the biggest issues that TRPA is preparing to address, because what we're going to bring forward today will only get us partway to our regional plan goals of this walkable communities and sufficient workforce housing and reducing VMT. So we are preparing to address the fact that our code does not address the size of units. And that is another thing that has really been highlighted through our community engagement and through our work with the Tahoe Living Working Group and the governing board. So a developer can purchase a small tourist unit, for instance, and they can convert it to a luxury unit of any size, basically. And that hasn't been such an impactful issue in the past, but with the current real estate market, the issue is really boiling over. So and then just another point is that we also don't have any requirement today for luxury units to contribute to affordable housing or to provide affordable housing. And that's another issue that we've heard. So, with the governing board input and input from this group, again, in our Tahoe Living Working Group, we want to move forward on those issues as quickly as possible. And those are the subject of phase 3 of the Tahoe Living Working Group's work. And we are aiming to launch that as we're closing out on this phase. So hopefully by the end of this year. And with that, I want to turn it over to Alyssa Bettinger.
Thanks, Karen, for that introduction. I'm Alyssa Bettinger for the record. I'm a senior planner with TRPA. We can go to the next slide. Next slide, please. So as Karen mentioned, the focus of today's presentation is on regional and local development standards. And when we talk about development standards, we really mean coverage, height, and density at the regional level, which is what TRPA sets, and then parking and setbacks at the local level. And we put these development standards in place to protect environmental thresholds, maintain neighborhood character, to better meet the needs of the regional plan. But based on a lot of the analysis that we've done so far with our consultants and just feedback that we've gotten from our working group, we know that these development standards actually in some cases hinder the type of housing that we want to see. And so the last couple of years have really been focused on making updates to these standards in order to incentivize affordable and workforce housing. You may remember about a year ago, we brought the Local Government and Housing Committee the first financial feasibility analysis that was done by our consultants, Cascadia Partners. Today, we are bringing the second round of analysis, which we're calling the Financial Feasibility 2.0. But it really aims to answer the question of how far do we need to turn the dials on these development standards in order to get affordable and workforce housing on the ground. I also want to note that we've had a lot of discussions with our working group on TRPA's development standards, the coverage, height, and density. We would really like to hear from this committee today on the standards on the right side, parking and particularly setbacks and particularly parking. And you will understand why parking is such an important topic to consider with these changes after you see Alex's presentation from Cascadia Partners. So with that, I will pass it over to Alex, who will be sharing his screen.
Hi, everyone. Alex Joyce with Cascadia Partners. Pleasure to be with you all today. Here we go. I'm actually sitting in Lincoln, California. I couldn't make it over there in time to be with you in person, so I wish I could, but we do a lot of work on housing related and affordability issues in communities big and small across the entire United States, with an emphasis on mountain communities who, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, have been really struggling mightily with housing affordability challenges. And so I'm excited to share this round of analysis with you all and have a good discussion today. So we want to talk about, why are we doing this analysis, and how did we get here in this process? What did phase 1 look at, and what are we looking at in phase 2? Share some of the analysis results with a particular focus on the town center areas. Crystallize some of the key takeaways, and then identify a few areas where there could be additional work, because zoning and addressing barriers in zoning code can take you further down the road in achieving more affordability, but it's not the only tool in the toolbox. And so identifying some additional actions that could be taken. So for the last several months, we've been studying the feasibility of multifamily development in Tahoe Basin. And we use a pro forma driven approach. So the same financial analysis along with a site planning tool to test drive different building types, different building forms, change different standards like density or coverage or height, as Alyssa talked about, to evaluate how those changes affect the underlying financial feasibility of a project, but even more importantly, the affordability of the units that can be produced. And so you'll see this little dial icon come up again and again, and you can think about the analysis as a series of dial turning. We dial some of these up or down and evaluate the impact. the financial impact and the site impact. Phase one was really all about testing a handful of different types of housing. So duplexes, fourplexes, and some smaller multifamily. And it really limited the number of dials that we turned to density, coverage, and height. And the analysis, which I think you all saw, it certainly changing those standards certainly made a difference, but it didn't get you all the way to where we understood you wanted to get. And thus phase two is really focused in on how far the dials need to get turned in order to achieve the outcomes that are desired, more housing affordability. So all of the major barriers were on the table to explore in phase two, and testing the dialing up or down of those standards in order to see how far zoning related changes could move the needle in terms of achieving more affordable housing. So this scale on the bottom, this is area median income shown in the sort of heat thermometer here, with some brackets around different affordability levels. So less than 80% being affordable, and then 80 to 120 being moderate, and 120 to 180 being workforce. These kinds of brackets are largely similar in most communities, but the basic idea here is that we want to see how far from the red zone down to the green zone we can move the needle with these various zoning related changes, excuse me. And we tested three types, three different scenarios. So we evaluated the existing codes and regulations to establish a baseline. What are we getting today? And what are some of the implications of the existing code and regulations? And then if we only change the dials on TRPA related regulations, how far can that move the needle? But then if we layer on to the TRPA related changes that local jurisdictions could make, how far does that move the needle? And you'll see this iterative evaluation unfold. And it's really important to understand that the focus of this analysis, and ultimately the focus of the changes, is centered around the town center areas. So specifically within the town centers or multifamily zones adjacent to town centers. And taken together, we're talking about less than 5% of the total Tahoe Basin area. And so it's a relatively small portion of the land area, but it's an important part of the growth future of the basin. Let's talk a little bit about the analysis, and again, within the town center. So just to ground everyone in the existing code, we have the TRPA related code of 25 units an acre, 70% maximum coverage, max height of 4 stories. And there's not currently a roof pitch requirement. Local code covers a number of things, but for this, we want to focus in on the minimum parking requirements of 2.25 spaces for all units, 2 bedrooms and above, and 1.25 spaces on average for units, 2 bedrooms and below. And then there's a series of front, rear, and side setbacks to consider. And you'll see how each of these elements really defines the amount of any given lot that can be built on, and it has implications. So let's step through this together. So if we look at just the existing standards, it becomes pretty quickly apparent that the 25 units an acre standard on this 12,000 square foot lot, so in the bottom left of the screen is a hypothetical 12,000 square foot lot. It having a 25 units an acre maximum limits the number of units that you can build on this 12,000 square foot lot to 6. That's just a simple mathematical equation. So if you can only build 6 units on a 12,000 square foot lot, that has implications. It means that the rents for these apartments need to be over families renting them need to have area median incomes over 200%, 230% of area median income. So quite expensive. You see that when you have this kind of density restriction on these kinds of lots, it results in, typically will result in larger units that are higher priced, that you can only build a few of them. And there's examples of that, around the basin. If you start to consider changes to the TRPA standards, such as increasing the density and allowing additional stories, you can move the needle. You can have, we identified about a 35% impact in terms of rent reduction. So if you follow along on the bottom, just to orient everyone, on the bottom there's this is the rent thermometer. And it shows a scale of area median income, as I talked about. There's a little gray bar that shows the original base case, the existing standards. And then at with each set of dial changes, you can see how far those changes move relative to the base case. So that's about a 35% reduction. And that really comes down to being able to build 12 units on this same 12,000 square foot lot, as opposed to 6. And so it's the same land price. It's the same land area, just allowing you to build 12 units instead of 6. But it doesn't, because of some other things that we'll talk about, parking and things like that, it doesn't allow you to get fully to the 5 stories yet. So there's other zoning standards that prevent additional height from being practical, but it does have a meaningful impact on the affordability. So this is what that would.
Just a quick question. I lost what the size of the lot is that you're using in these examples.
Yes, it's 12,000 square feet. It's right here notated above the graphic there. 12,000 square feet. Okay. So let's talk about barrier number 2. So if we've talked about the maximum density allowed on the site, barrier 2 is if we account for all of the setbacks, so 20 feet in the front, 10 feet in the back, on the side, excuse me, and 15 in the back. On this particular lot, and it becomes more and more dramatic the smaller the lot is, in terms of the allowable buildable area, it gets reduced to only about 59% of that lot. So you take a lot of the edges off and you're left with a buildable area of about 59%. So the setbacks have a pretty sizable impact. And then you layer on minimum parking requirements. So parking is required. Housing is not a required outcome of a development project. You get to build the amount of housing that you can once you account for setbacks, lot coverage, and parking. And so the building gets scaled down in order to accommodate these things. And what the result of parking this building is that 60 or 76% of the buildable area, the area inside the areas bounded by the setbacks, has to be dedicated to parking. So you've got parking in a surface format on the back, and then you have a row of parking tucked under the ground floor of the building as well. And those parking spaces are required in the current code. It's not negotiable. And in this example, they're accommodated and they take up 3/4 of the buildable area. So that is costly, but it also limits the ability to go more dense on this particular project. So if we start to evaluate the impact of reducing parking minimums, the needle starts to move even more. So reducing the parking minimums and also optimizing to take advantage or to achieve the full 70% coverage allowed by reducing some of the setbacks incrementally, that reduces the rents, the achievable rents required to make this project feasible even further. So we started at 230% AMI and we're down to 170% AMI. So it gets to within the workforce range. It's still not affordable to lower moderate income families, but it gets to within the workforce range and out of the red. So the parking ratios in this particular example are reduced to 0.75 spaces per unit on average. So that effectively means that some of the studio units perhaps do not have parking, but most of the units still have some amount of parking, at least one.
Alex, can I ask you a question? I'm sorry to interrupt your
Sure.
presentation, but in all these calculations, have you used kind of a common denominator for land price? Or factored in the fact that, you know, my preference would be, I know a lot of people in the community have kind of reinforced this desire to have these affordable housing units part of a redevelopment project. Obviously, tearing down buildings and repurposing land is a lot more expensive than finding a virgin piece of land and using it for construction. But obviously, in terms of a rate of return, those costs are key in making any project feasible. So did you use kind of a standard land price in determining what sort of income was needed or what sort of rent return was needed in order to you know, accommodate the developer's need to, you know, get financing or pay off the debt?
Yes, good question. Yeah, so all of the assumptions that go into our analysis here were vetted with a variety of builders and developers locally. Obviously, that's just a snapshot in time, right? So construction costs are at a historic high, land costs are at a historic high. So you add it all up and it paints a fairly grim picture by historic standards, but they are all calibrated as best we can to the local basin area, if that's what you're asking.
I don't suppose that included, your analysis included an inventory of potential sites for additional affordable housing projects. So,
No, we did not do any sort of inventory. It's an evaluation of typical lot sizes within different areas of the basin, but there's no, we haven't conducted any sort of broader inventory. Okay, so in addition to,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Alex. It does
sure.
also look like Mr. Aguilar has a comment or question.
Yeah, I do have a question in regards to the income needed on the units.
Mhm.
Is there a way to know the number of people living in the Tahoe Basin? How many people actually qualify within this area? So when you go from 235 to 180 to 140, how many more people are you able to bring into the housing ability?
Yes, yeah, the census data can give us a snapshot of that. I don't have that at my fingertips, but yeah, that's knowable. Obviously, income tends to be distributed with a bias towards the middle. And so the closer you get towards, 100% area mean income, the closer you are to serving a maximum number of people.
Okay, but do you have hard numbers, or where do we get those numbers?
Census has, go ahead.
Sorry, I can jump in here. We've also have a series of local regional housing needs assessments from around the basin that have that data at a more granular level specific to the, to our communities.
Okay, I'd like to see those numbers if possible. That'd be helpful for me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the area, in a way, the area median income scale gives you some approximation of kind of the distribution. So our goal would be to pivot around that 100%, ideally, right? There's going to be some below and some above. Certainly, once we get out towards the red end of the spectrum here, it's a relatively small slice of the population, certainly the permanent population. So when we were able to reduce some of the on-site parking requirements to take better advantage of the 70% coverage allowance, it also allowed us to add 8 extra units on the site. So incrementally, this 12,000 square foot site has gone from accommodating only 6 units to 12 units and now 20 units. And that is the central reason why those units can become more attainable to the workforce in this case.
And Ms. Gustafson has a question as well.
Oh, thank you. I'm following up on the last dialogue. I apologize due to Cisco's question. It made me also realize, and I believe some groups have done this, Karen, but we need to also not only look at who's living in the basin, who this qualifies for, but also those workers that are commuting in and out of the basin that would prefer to be here if they could, and what those numbers look like. So just another data point that I think would be extremely helpful to all of us.
I know we asked that in our housing needs assessment, so we do have that data well, in particular, just for Washoe Tahoe, certainly. So I think putting it all together is a great idea.
Yeah, agreed. We did a similar kind of analysis in the Jackson, Wyoming area. And I mean, the punchline of that is most folks who are having to commute in are going to be not at the higher income of the income spectrum. So it would skew your need even further towards the affordable end. That's the short story pretty much everywhere. Okay, so removing the maximum coverage requirement. So this example tried to calibrate the setbacks to take advantage of the 70% allowance. But if there were an area-wide stormwater treatment system in a town center area, say for instance, and there was the ability to remove the maximum coverage requirement because the stormwater was being dealt with at a district scale, that can further reduce the on-site costs necessary for stormwater treatment and also free up some additional portion of the property for housing. And so it has a further reduction. So now we're sort of sitting where the average pricing for the unit is sitting kind of solidly within that workforce segment of the affordability band. And lastly, if we continue to turn our dials and we remove minimum parking requirements, and this is probably more at the theoretical end of the exercise because there's relatively few projects that would opt to have zero parking. But just to give you a sense of where that could land you, it gets into 129% of area mean income for the units and adds significantly to the number of units that can be accommodated. When you're talking about multifamily, a parking space and an apartment are pretty darn close to the same size, 570 square feet in a unit. And when you account for driveways and ramps and other things like that and structured parking, you get up pretty close to 500 square foot for all in for each parking space. And so if the more you reduce the need for parking in these projects, it has almost a 1-for-1 ability to replace that parking with units. And so this particular example is 69 units. And the needle gets pushed down closer to the moderate segment of the income. So some of the units in this project could be moderate, but most of them are going to be workforce and above. So in summary,
Still
we add it
on a
all up.
quarter-
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just really quick, is that on a quarter acre,
It's on a 12,000 square foot lot.
which is a quarter acre, right?
Yep. We're testing this all in the same lot size.
Mr. Friedrich has a question as well.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. So Alex, on that, this example, the number of parking spaces is you just had zero, yeah. Well, and I guess I have a question, maybe it's also for staff. You know, California has new legislation as of, I believe, September. I think it's Assembly Bill 2097 that bars local governments from imposing parking minimums for projects that are within a half a mile of a transit stop. I don't know if I think there might be some headway time that's tied to that, but I just wanted to put that out there to see if there's how we're responding to that at TRPA. We talked about it at City Council, surely, but just again, removing parking minimums for transit-oriented development. And so I guess maybe that's a question at TRPA staff level. How do we relate to that legislation? And B, Alex, have you seen new projects going in post that legislation that are really pushing the envelope on minimal parking spaces and how that's working out?
I can respond to part of that for you, John. My understanding is we don't have a transit system in the basin right now that qualifies as the type of transit that the state of California requires. And TRPA itself does not have parking standards. So right now it would be up to the local governments.
So I guess my question with respect to parking for both Alex or anyone who would like to respond to this, my concern is, and I understand that it's unlikely that these developments would have zero parking spaces, but doesn't that have a tendency to push cars into the adjacent neighborhoods? creating a problem that is going to have to be addressed one way or the other. I mean, you can put up signs that says parking is reserved for, occupants of the street, but it's going to be another enforcement challenge for local government. So I think the idea of zero parking is unrealistic. I also don't know whether or not we factored in any demographics. I mean, I would feel a lot more comfortable if we have a need for, I believe, 4,500 affordable housing units, correct, Karen? To survey those individuals to find out how many of them are single adults, how many of them have children, how many children, because a 500 square foot unit is not going to accommodate a family of 4. And so I think that would help the developer in understanding what the market demand is specifically to the people who might be occupying these units, rather than just assuming that if we build them, they will come.
I can address the first part.
Okay.
At our August meeting after the governing board meeting, we're going to have a walkabout in Placer County. And one of the items that they're going to talk about is their proposed parking management. So I would wait to hear from, they're more able to answer that and what they're working on.
Okay.
I think one of the issues they are talking about how to address is what you said, the impact on the
Mhm.
adjacent neighborhoods. That's what we heard at the APC this morning. In terms of the demographics and so forth, I'll turn that over to Karen.
We do want to spend some time after Alex's presentation is finished and my presentation is finished, talking specifically about parking. So we appreciate your comments, but could we maybe hold that discussion until the end?
Sure. Yeah. Could you also at that time address the issue of demographics and who our audience actually is and who we're trying to accommodate? That would be great.
Yeah, and I can just add, this is what Alex's presentation is kind of the background, laying out the costs, and then the proposal is not exactly the same as this. And in those regional housing needs, I can just address the demographics question really fast. In those needs assessments, I believe it has much of the information that you're looking for, but we can look through it. And I do think that all of that is available. So we just need to find the way to make it.
Yeah, and I think there was another question about, in other communities that have removed minimum parking requirements, what's the response been of the market? And I can say that the vast majority of projects that have happened in communities that have removed minimum parking requirements, I mean, upwards of over 80% of all new projects after had some level of parking. For a variety of reasons, whether it's the bank and the lenders requiring it, or just the developer feeling as though the market's gonna demand it. A very small portion of projects, even in Portland, even in inner Portland, where we're sort of on a little further down the road in eliminating minimum parking requirements, there are very, very few projects that have chosen not to have any off-street parking.
Yeah. I'm just going to jump in since I asked the question. Sorry to raise my hand, but
You're fine.
it would be interesting to know like what the market was producing in parking. I think it's not 0 or 1,000 parking spaces. It's what's the right number or the minimal needed for the circumstance. It'd be interesting to know how many parking spaces developers were building without being required to meet a certain minimum threshold, and was that average number lower than previously required under the minimum requirement?
The answer is yes. It's typically lower than what was previously required, because oftentimes parking codes aren't updated every day, and so they were fairly old in a lot of cases. And where the market has landed in communities big and small is somewhere between 0.8 and 0.5. So 0.5 ends up on the very more urban end of the development spectrum, and 0.8 is adjacent to a smaller downtown, say. These are not projects that would be out in the hinterlands. Those would have higher parking ratios. But if we're talking about town center like development, it's somewhere in that spectrum. That's what we're seeing if the market's left to its own devices.
Great. I'm glad you had that info. Thank you.
Absolutely. And it's also important to remember that this is, this is how far can zoning changes go to incentivize the market rate for-profit developers to build smaller, more cost-effective units. This is not, how can we incentivize nonprofit developers to build more cost-effective subsidized housing. That's not what this is about. This is about how can we fine-tune zoning so that the market is incentivized to deliver smaller, less costly housing. So this is not the answer to every affordable housing need that the basin has. I just want to make sure that's clear. It can oftentimes seem like this has to answer all of those questions, and it's part of a larger strategy. So to summarize, to kind of boil it all down into the iterative analysis that I just laid out for you, if we take that 4-step approach here, so going from the existing standards to the TRPA standards is a reduction of 35%. Going from TRPA standards and layering on the local standards, including a reduction in parking, it's 19%. And then looking at a project that has no parking is additional 19%. So you've moved the needle from 230% AMI on an average unit cost basis down to 129% average, right? Some are a little bit more, some are a little bit less in the project, but that's the average. So bottom line, very substantial reductions, but it doesn't solve all your affordable housing needs, as I said. So it can reduce housing costs, but it's not enough to produce all of the units that are necessary within particularly the affordable and moderate end of the spectrum. Those units typically require some kind of public investment, public subsidy to achieve. There's just simply no way for the market to deliver those at the price points needed. And so this is a strategy that can help you fine tune what the market can do, but it doesn't solve what the market can't do. So going beyond this kind of zoning level set of changes are some additional ideas where that can help you move the needle even further, right? And could be further incentives for more traditional affordable housing developers, nonprofits, land trusts, other actors in the housing development arena to move the needle even further. So evaluating cost reductions. Are there ways to further incentivize deed-restricted affordable housing, perhaps at lower price points, through reducing costs, reducing fees or exemptions? Direct investments, right? Local or regional investments in affordable housing are oftentimes, an important part of the financial puzzle. Land banking. Land is not cheap in the Tahoe Basin. I'm sure you're all aware of that. And so looking for ways to come up with a portfolio of property, to inventory property, public or institutional land that could be utilized and create a pipeline of development opportunities for affordable housing is an important part of the puzzle. And then, investigating and exploring with partners these emerging technologies around construction. So partial offsite construction, fully modularized offsite construction, those can speed up the delivery of housing and can reduce the overall cost. And there's some pretty pioneering companies coming out of the Bay Area, but all across the US in this arena. So the market's changing. So these are just some food for thought about how to kind of roll up your sleeves and go a little further.
Can I add one thing to Alex's point, that last point? We have been talking with partners like the CTC as part of their they're looking at their strategic plan about could some of their properties be used for the kind of land banking that he's talking about. We've also been talking about, are there combinations of complete streets and stormwater projects that could get some public funding that would help? So there's a lot more work to be done, but we've already started working a little bit on that other side of it besides just regulatory reform.
That's great news. I know that we all are fascinated with this and we want to have a robust discussion, but leading off from staff's direction, if we could go into staff's presentation on the TRPA side of the world after Alex, and then we'll get to further questions and discussion. I know we're trying to wrap this up by 6 o'clock. So, or not 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock my time where I'm at right now. So I will kick it over to TRPA staff.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. And if we could pull up our presentation again. And I guess I'll just get going on it. So I want to mention upfront that our proposal was based on the analysis that was completed by Cascadia Partners. It's also based on a lot of the input that we've heard from our working group, our governing board, stakeholders, and the public. So there has been a lot of discussion that has gone into what you'll see today. I also want to note that this proposal is focused on deed restricted housing. As Karen mentioned in the beginning, it's, this type of deed restricted housing is primarily serving people who either already live in the basin and are struggling to afford housing or are at risk of losing their housing, or they are workers who are commuting in nearly every day and adding to the trips and the traffic that we have today and would probably like to live in the basin, but they can't afford to do so. So I just want to provide that context up front that this proposal is very much focused on deed restricted housing. Next slide, please.
And we are not seeing slides. Oh, there we go.
There we go. Awesome. So there are two primary locations that we're focusing on with this proposal. One is within our town centers, which was the focus of Alex's presentation. The other is in our multifamily residential zone, our areas that are already zoned for multifamily that are just adjacent to our town centers. This is where a lot of our multifamily housing already exists. We are going to focus on the proposal for town centers today, just because we are kind of strapped on time and this is where we have the most consensus. But we are working on a set of policy areas for the multifamily zones that are appropriate to the scale of these areas. We're working on that and coordinating with the local jurisdiction staff. Next slide, please. And here are these two locations just on a map. I know it's a bit hard to see, but the town center zones are outlined in black, and they are a relatively small portion of the basin. They encompass less than 1% of the total basin area. But that said, they are very important areas for our growth. It's where the highest intensity of uses we have today and where we really want to concentrate and see that growth in the future. Our multifamily areas are shown in pink. They're a little bit larger area, but they still only encompass less than 4% of the total basin area. So really we are talking about a small percentage of area here. Next slide, please. I also want to note that we have received some comments and concerns that this proposal will encourage more development potential that is beyond the development rights system, and that it will encourage developers to build large luxury units. I want to note again that the proposal is focused on deed restricted units, not larger luxury units. And the cumulative impact analysis of the regional plan did take into account the potential development of these residential units. So we are not talking about going beyond what has already been analyzed. This graphic is to show that there are, about 3,500 residential or development potential units remaining to be allocated. About a third of those are bonus units for deed restricted units only. And we can kind of continue with the status quo that you see on the left with single family homes primarily being spread out all throughout the basin, or we can tweak our development standards to really encourage concentrated growth within our town centers and adjacent to our town centers. Next slide. And this does have an environmental benefit. You can see here the 3 single family homes at 2,000 square feet each are equivalent, in terms of number of units that could go into a 3-unit triplex. This has a smaller footprint, and these are within our multifamily zones as well as our town centers. So they're near transit, grocery stores, they're more likely to be occupied by someone who can walk to these services and use their car less. Next slide, please. So the first proposal area that we'll talk about is coverage. The proposal would allow greater than 70% coverage within town centers, so long as there is green stormwater infrastructure included in the project, or that the project can treat all water on site through the use of on-site BMPs. This proposal would be only for deed restricted, affordable, moderate, and achievable housing. It would also only apply on high capability lands. And we have also heard that that while you can have up to 70% coverage in town centers right now, you still have to transfer that in. And there is a cost and just complexity in finding that coverage. So with this option, we are looking at whether we can exempt certain deed restricted, 100% deed restricted projects from coverage transfers, as well as some mitigation fees to just make it a bit easier to do that. Next slide, please. Building height. Currently, we allow 4 stories in our town centers. We are proposing to allow 5 stories of height within our town centers. There are instances in which we have allowed 5 stories of height in our town centers, such as the Heavenly Village. Again, this proposal would be applied only to 100% deed restricted developments. And in Chapter 37 of our code, we do have quite a few findings that developers have to make when they come through the project review process that prevent developments from extending above the tree canopy or not mixing well with neighborhood character. So there are quite a few safeguards that we have in place right now. Next slide, please. And then last is the density proposal in town centers. Density doesn't control much, except for the amount of units that can be built within the building. So density is not a mechanism that controls how big the building is. It is simply how many units can fit inside the building envelope. And so our density proposal is to move to a no density cap. The developer could decide how many units can reasonably fit inside the building footprint. And like Alex said, the smaller the units are, the more affordable they become to the occupant. So that is really what we're trying to encourage here, is smaller units in and near our town centers. This proposal would apply to deed restricted units, as well as market rate with a portion or a percentage of deed restricted units within. Next slide, please. So that is, kind of a quick overview of our proposal within town centers. Again, we are working or coordinating with local jurisdiction staff on our proposal within multifamily areas. I just want to touch quickly on some implementation options for consideration that we'd love to hear your thoughts on today. We understand that what works for the North Shore might not work for the South Shore and vice versa. And we really value the local jurisdictions being able to kind of tailor their specific standards to their communities through area plans. So ideally, we would see these standards adopted through area plan amendments and new area plans being brought forward where necessary. There has been some concern from the working group just at the slow pace of area plan amendments. They take a while. And so staff are working on options to help accommodate those amendments and help speed up the process. This could include some sample environmental review language or regulatory language. But we would really love to hear this committee's feedback on ways we could potentially help or speed up this process. Next slide, please. Parking and setbacks. everyone saw that this was a big impediment, that parking specifically is a big impediment to building the type of housing that we really need to see in the basin. Parking takes up a significant amount of the lot and does not leave a lot of the space for the actual units. And so again, we're working with local jurisdiction staff to develop some options, but we would love to kind of continue the parking conversation with this committee today. Some options that we've discussed with the group are removing parking standards from local jurisdiction codes and letting the developer decide what, how much parking should be provided on site given market demands. We could introduce parking maximums instead of minimums. We could uncouple parking from the unit. And so if a renter is renting a unit, they could pay extra if they needed a parking space. But vice versa, they could pay less if they don't actually have a car. And shared parking agreements for areas where there is a lot of parking that already exists, whether that could be better utilized. Commercial parking could be used by residential developments at night, for example. Next slide. We have heard some concerns about compliance and evacuation, and I just want to touch on quickly. Compliance, TRPA has an existing compliance program for our deed restrictions that we require annual compliance reporting, and we do auditing. We may have a need for an ongoing funding mechanism as we ramp up more deed restrictions with this incentive package. And then evacuation, TRPA doesn't do evacuation planning, but we have worked with, or we are coordinating with local law enforcement and fire agencies to make sure that this proposal can be accommodated by them. And again, this proposal is within the scope of what was analyzed in the 2012 regional plan that did consider evacuation. Next slide. Here is our timeline for completion of phase 2, which would include this height, coverage, and density code package. Today is obviously June 14th. We are planning to release the environmental analysis to the public in July, which would include the analysis of these changes. We're planning to begin the public hearing process in September and hoping to wrap up with approval by the governing board by the end of the year. And in the meantime, between now and really the end of the year, staff is doing quite a bit of outreach with interested public and stakeholder groups who are interested in learning more about the proposal. So if anyone is interested in having us come talk to any specific groups, we're happy to do so. Next slide. So before I turn it over to the committee to discuss, I just want to give a quick summary of what we did hear from the working group back in April. Again, just the area plan amendment challenges that it is sort of a slow process, but we have a pretty dire housing need and need for quick changes at this point. We did bring forward the density proposal that would apply to all market rate. And the working group suggested that we should include, or we should require a percentage of any market rate development to be, or to have an affordability component. So we are working on specific numbers for that. There were some questions about how this proposal would apply to mixed use developments. And we are working on incorporating this proposal into mixed use developments that would include a deed restricted residential component. And then last, again, is parking. Parking is set at the local level. There was quite a bit of interest from the working group in allowing developers to sort of determine how much parking should be provided on site based on the market. that said, if certain jurisdictions change their parking standards, there could be overflow, like Shelley mentioned, to neighboring jurisdictions. So there could be a need for regional parking management strategies. So there's a lot of different options on the table that we'd love to hear about, or we'd love to hear your feedback on today. So with that, I'll open it up to Alexis to lead the discussion on how we can best align regional and local implementation options, as well as just feedback on the proposal itself.
Great, thank you so much. What a fantastic presentation. I do want to note that I thought we had an hour left, but due to schedules on the committee, we do need to end at 2:30, and that includes public comment. So I just have a question for staff. Could you let us know if we need to give full direction and make a decision today, or if we can also, have another meeting, or does that mess up the timeline that was just shown to us? I just want to make sure that there's enough time for discussion and questions and for people to digest all this information.
We did not agendize this for direction as much as for your suggestions, to hear what your
Okay.
reaction is to all of this. You may remember we had a workshop with the full board in July, and we also have been working with the Tahoe Living Working Group, which some of you are on. So we'll continue along that. And plus, we're bringing next month work plan back to you that includes this. So you won't be holding anything up. But
Okay.
if you could, I would suggest, I see probably a half a dozen people in the audience that
Right.
have come here, so you probably want to
Yeah, we want to hear from them.
get them. Yeah.
Okay, well, with that understanding, any burning questions by committee members? I see Ms. Gustafson's got her hand up.
Thanks, Alexis. One comment and one quick question. My comment is that, yes, I think parking is going to fall on the backs of the local governments to look at both parking management plans and potentially community parking lots. If we're going to incentivize private developers to do this sort of housing. And we're undertaking that parking management work. But I've also encouraged staff that we're going to need to work on some parking areas that we designate for overnight parking if people have vehicles and can't park on their own site, to address Shelley's concern. So I think local government is going to have to be advocates, and in this moving to provide infrastructure to help achieve the housing that we need. Second question, I notice in the recommendation that the coverage cap for deed restricted multifamily housing is only on high capability land in the town centers. And I have one town center in my jurisdiction that is fine with that, Kings Beach, but Tahoe City, if you know Tahoe City, virtually that whole downtown strip along the golf course is potentially in low capability land. It's already developed projects. We want to incentivize more housing in that area. And so I want us to think about, and this is where I don't know all of our rules and regs well enough to know whether somebody can transfer coverage in, whether the county can incentivize by restoring areas and bringing coverage in. What are the options? Because we can't take away that town center. And it's there, it's already developed. And if we want some housing to be in our town center of Tahoe City, we're going to need to figure that issue out.
Cindy, the outcome we're after is being able to do some of this type of development that Alex presented, which means coverage greater than 70%, but we don't want to jeopardize water quality in doing that. So if there are ways with stormwater infrastructure on more sensitive lands, we could do it. we'd have to, be certain that that would really
And
work.
it's already, yeah. And, as you know, I'm pretty proud of the fact Tahoe City had the first town center wide stormwater system. So we did that many years ago. Because we were so landlocked there in that narrow strip. So I understand that concern. I'm just wondering if the language could also include consideration for already developed properties that are clearly in I don't know. I'm not sure how to give that some thought. I guess I would just leave that with staff because
We can add that in. We've actually been talking with consultants about the process of trying to identify these areas and design standards. And one of the things that first was recommended as a first step is we refine what we're trying to achieve and where the areas are we would do it.
yeah, maybe there's a separate zone that just indicates that zone, because I understand if you have outlying parcels adjacent to SEZ, we'd like to buy them out and restore them, right? But if you can't do that in the middle of town and have a functioning town where that is. So anyway, just a thought.
Got it?
Thank you. Any other committee member questions or comments before I open it up to public comment? I'm not hearing any, so we will now go to public comment on this item. If any member of the public wishes to address the committee on this agenda item, please raise your hand now, either in person or by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen or dialing *9 on your phone, and you will be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. And we'll start with the room.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if we could go to the room first. If there's anyone like to make public comment in the room?
Hello, this is Ben Harmon from State Line. I can hardly add anything to the extensive public comments others have already written in, but I'll add my voice to the chorus. While affordability is important, it appears to me that you are considering this in isolation. Cascadia Consulting has done a nice job of presenting what appears to me to be a pretty Excel spreadsheet, moving a virtual needle around by changing virtualized and abstracted numericized inputs, such as lot setbacks, height limitations, and parking requirements. But on the ground, literally, these are not abstractions. These translate to physical realities that are absolutely in conflict with the mission of the TRPA. What happened to preservation and restoration of the natural environment? Incentives are not the same as enforcement. Financial incentives are the strongest incentives, and you do not control those incentives. Any policy changes in these areas that can be exploited for financial gain will be. As others have pointed out, similar efforts in the past have been so exploited. But at a more fundamental level, population impacts are the root of all of our problems in the basin, affecting traffic, infrastructure, quality of life, egress, and of course, environmental impacts. The proposed changes are guaranteed to increase population. There's no math that is going to convince me otherwise. So no, I'm absolutely opposed to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is there anyone else in the room that'd like to make public comment?
There may be a person coming back in a couple of seconds. She went home to let her dog out. I said she
Okay.
had time. She's texting me now. She's on her way here.
Please, anybody wants to make public comment, step forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Patrick Taylor, and after watching the presentation, many of these proposed changes, my company is a developer, and all we do is develop achievable housing in the basin. And many of these changes are absolutely needed. As we design our projects, we run into these problems all the time. And since all we're trying to do is provide workforce housing, I've lived here for 34 years, and it's a huge problem. And we eat out in this town, and almost all the workers have an issue with their housing. Every time we talk to them, it's a big, big problem. So if we can't provide this workforce housing, and the big issue is we run into height, it's a real common problem. And then the coverage is another big, huge issue. And then when I talk to lenders, like I talked to one this morning, I talk to them 2 or 3 times a week. If we can't get more units, then it doesn't pencil out. Okay, so it's a Rubik's cube, just like 37A is. You know, that's a whole Rubik's cube as well. So we need the additional height. The parking can be an issue. Having lived here for so long, I'm a firm believer in garages. So we design our units with garages, because when you have a winter like we just had, if people don't have a garage, the time it takes to shovel their car off, and we were at the Dollar Creek Crossing, the last presentation that they had there, all the complaints that I heard from the people were all about, well, where are they going to put their stuff? They're going to have junk all over the parking lots. Well, pretty much most of the people that live here have mountain bikes and kayaks and canoes and cars. So if you don't have a garage, where do you put all that stuff? So then you got junk everywhere. So that's why I firmly believe in having garages in all of our units. So we design them that way, even though it is deed restricted housing. It doesn't really cost that much more money to build a garage at the bottom, and then you build up above that garage. So that's again where the height comes in. If we can add another floor of height, then we provide more units, as Alex pointed out. So these changes that you're proposing are desperately needed. And so is the setback changes. Those are desperately needed again, just as Alex pointed out, because it allows us to add more units. Anything that you can do to allow us to add more units, and these changes are all go in that direction, will vastly increase our ability to have more local people have places to live. And the key, as Alyssa had noted, is as long as they're deed restricted, so people have to live here, the achievable housing, as you're proposing, they have to, 30 hours a week, and they have to work for a local employer, then what do you have to worry about? Then the people that are commuting over the hill, they're not commuting anymore. So that's helping our environment. I think these changes are fantastic. I wholeheartedly hope that the board approves them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vinton Hawkins, MJD Development. We do workforce housing. Want to echo what this gentleman's comments were. Just want to point out, citing a suitable site in a town center is incredibly challenging. And if we're lucky enough to find sites, we're going to need everything you're proposing here and more to make the best of those sites. They are going to be limited. This is, in my opinion, very rifled approach to addressing the issues, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I am very concerned about commercial development and the economical
Can you
impacts.
say your name, ma'am? I'm sorry.
Stacy Baker,
Thank you.
in a booming voice. Sorry, I'm sorry. Is there any way to take this down? As
You
someone
sound
who
great here.
appreciates science and someone who appreciates the environment, I ask you, who is asking you to push through these lack of restrictions? Nobody is talking about the environment. Nobody is talking about lake clarity. Nobody is talking about the water. No one is talking. Tahoe is a forested area. I am very concerned. Commercial logging is raising the temperature here. Trees are our natural air conditioners. More development and more erosion and poorly planned development will destroy this area. Latitude 39, where's that effluent going to go? How do we have drainage? I haven't heard any of these people proposing, let's build higher, let's do this, let's do that. We're not taking into account in our decision-making, our unique environment. I implore TRPA to please look at the environment, to please have some type of environmental impact studies done. The people that stand to make something from all of this development, of course, wholeheartedly want you to do these actions, but There is another side to it. And if you don't pay attention to that side, there will be nothing in Tahoe for anybody to enjoy. Please consider your legacy. Please consider this fragile environment. It can't take much more. I just couldn't imagine. And he's talking about less people driving up and down the hill. That's better for the environment. We have a 2-lane road. The 2-lane road is constantly in gridlock. We don't have the infrastructure, the road size, parking issues, sewer issues, power issues to handle this stuff. Who is bringing that up? I haven't heard that being addressed. Please, TRPA, please, please protect this area for your grandchildren and mine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone else in the audience? Elizabeth?
Yes. Elizabeth Learnhardt, Zephyr Cove. I was going to talk about lake clarity and all this, but listening to these developers and knowing the need that there is for low income housing, I just want to bring out some points. You want to de-restrict these units, which is fine because it provides some reassurance they don't get turned into high secondary homes for $2.5 million, hopefully. But what is the reason for the reduced parking? We could put these structures, as he pointed out, underneath. I have seen it in other towns. The downtown centers have no parking structures except every building has to have 2 or 3 levels underneath the building. It would work just fine, and it would not increase the footprint. You're planning to reduce are you planning to reduce housing elsewhere outside the city centers? Because if you don't, as she said before me, you would increase the population dramatically, and it's not a zero-sum game, but you put more people in the same area and you do not look at CEQA requirements, which you are supposed to do according to California code. And you need to look at evacuations, which you're also supposed to do. You can't just say we need more people right here so they don't commute to Carson City or where else. You need to look at how do these people get in and out if there's another fire. And you have not addressed that. And to say, oh, we don't look at that, we work with local police and fire. Have you read what South Lake Tahoe has as their fire plan? It's awfully dated. I mean, 2016, some of the improvements stopped being recorded in 2008. It's hardly appropriate since we had a fire season in 2021 that was very extreme. You, on the other hand, want to reduce access by reducing lanes on Highway 50. I'm sorry, you made me say it because that's what you're trying to do. How are you going to accommodate more people with less mobility and less parking in the same space? I don't see it. I'm against this. And one more thing, this kind of plan leads to something that Vail Resorts has done in the Rockies in Colorado. And who wants that kind of look? I mean, you can go there and see how these high-rise buildings are destroying the aesthetics of the area, how the whole town is basically owned by a company town, mega company that gives cheap labor to high school kids, and otherwise the locals can't live there. This is not the right direction. We don't need tourists of that sort. We need more tourists that are eco-tourists and appreciate the landscape and don't want to see it destroyed by high rises. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, we have approximately right now 7 online. So if we'll go to the online commenters.
Great, thank
Ellie,
you.
please go ahead if you'd like to address the committee.
Hi, Ellie Waller, thank you. I don't know why we don't plan these meetings better. It's not fair and disrespectful to the public to have an hour and a half of presentations. Obviously, we're not buying into this with the number of comments that you've received. The changes may be supported by our commissioners and supervisors, but not by the public. The ski areas and major employers must build more units. That's some part of the equation that's never addressed. Threshold feasibility analysis must be done in concert to make sure we're not violating the thresholds with these proposed changes. Recommendation of less strict rules on SEZs is absurd. I've seen that request from another committee. I propose each local jurisdiction provide local surveys to the communities that are being affected most. Single family residents now are going to possibly have multifamily next door. Good luck with those surveys. How can you expect the private landowners to embrace price caps or developers as well on rent caps? Parking conundrum has been brought up. Conflicts between the employers, the local employees, and the tourists. Local employees paying for parking makes absolutely no sense when they're already struggling trying to afford their housing. The expectation of public transit is unrealistic. The expectation of the developer and the first time or second time buyer for high-end amenities is always a problem. Building smaller units isn't the only component to that problem. Tahoe Town Centers has also been brought up. They are unique. They're not cookie cutter. You can't compare South Shore to Kings Beach. So even though allowing heights doesn't mean that's what the people want. And in our first area plan in Placer County, we were told, thank you for your consideration, but we're going to use the maximums provide. Please listen to the people. Thank you.
Next, Ann Nichols, please go ahead. I'm sorry, Ann Nichols, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Ann Nichols, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. Yeah, this, huge increases, 240% increase in density on multifamily, 37% increase in height, 75% increase in coverage or unlimited, depending. Setbacks, 100% increases, and then a 66% reduction in parking. I don't know anybody that doesn't have a car at Tahoe. Maybe you do on South Shore, but up.
Do we lose Ms. Nichols?
No, can you hear me? I'm sorry.
I can hear you now.
Okay,
Continue on, sorry.
Yeah, Ann Nichols, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. This on this multifamily zoning, TRPA, 240% increase in density, 37% increase in height, 75% in coverage or more. Setbacks, 100% increase and 66% reduction in parking. I don't know anybody on the North Shore that doesn't have a car. Maybe it's different on the South Shore, but we are different up here. We have 2 lanes. We are, it's very tight. I'm very concerned about this affordable. I'm a realtor for 50 years. $2,400 a month is not affordable. 30, that's the lowest I guess they've come up with. $3,700 a month is definitely not. This is big money. I don't think they're really fixing anything. What I'd like to see you do is first go to cost reductions, go into direct investment incentives, land banking, new construction technology, go to limiting the STRs, go to things that aren't going to ruin the basin. Did you see that we are the #1 place not to visit on a weekend? Just came out. So, this is, I'm really sad, 8 senators in Nevada voted against giving TRPA more money this time because they saw this table and went, what is going on? What are they thinking? My other concern is to give all these, you got over 50 comments, I believe, and to give us 10 minutes to speak. A lot of people spend a lot of time and it just seems you're really trying to reduce public participation. You really don't want to hear what we think. And you're just going ahead. And Alexis, I know you mean the best, but you're on 9 different boards. You're on the Prosperity Board, you're on the TTD, you're on Governing Board, Chair of Washoe Commission, you're chairing this Government Housing Committee, you're on the Tahoe Living Housing, you're on RPIC, you're on the Federal Advisory and the local CAB. How do we get any real checks and balances, any skepticism when the same people are on every board? Isn't there a conflict of interest? Are we really getting representation? Thank you.
Thank you. And I will say, I know that I read all of the rest of the board did as well. And I'm so sorry that people feel like we're not listening. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to do a better job. So we're going to be brainstorming that as we move forward. And can we please move to the next public commenter?
Rhonda Tyser, please go ahead and address the committee.
Thank you. I'd like to remind everyone why accessory dwelling units don't work to solve Incline's and Crystal Bay's affordable housing problems. In 2021, we told our commissioner why they wouldn't work, and I'd like to remind all of you of 6 of our reasons. First, Incline has unique parking issues. Unlike other basin areas, Incline has no designated parking along most major streets, and in winter, no parking on any street. Incline city planner laid out the village with dozens of circular courts off of its major roads. Court driveways go all off of the center like spokes on a wheel. Any car not in a garage or driveway has no place to park. Second, many Incline residents only have one way to evacuate in an emergency. Because of Incline's layout, many neighborhoods have only one exit, and this is a scary truth for hundreds of residents living along Upper and Lower Tyner. According to emergency personnel tests, a wildfire on Highway 28 can reach Upper Tyner in 11 minutes. Third, a single ADU will double a parcel's infrastructure use, including water, sewer, electricity, and internet. Most Incline gas and water lines aren't big enough to serve an extra home, let alone 2. So ADUs won't be able to simply piggyback on Incline's existing infrastructure grid. Streets and drives will need to be dug up and new lines installed. Fourth, ADUs affect property values. According to a recent Fortune magazine article, ADUs may affect adjacent property values because they basically turn single-family residential zones into multifamily zones. Fifth, Incline ADUs can't be monitored and enforced in a way to prevent their misuse. Owners do what gives them the most bang for the buck. Rules are easy to make and easier to break. It's estimated we have at least 100 unpermitted STRs operating under the radar in Incline. Sixth, and most importantly, ADUs will not solve Incline's affordable housing conundrum. Most ADUs upslope will not be close to public transit, nor to in-good recreational facilities. Building apartments in town centers and reducing STRs in our neighborhoods are the best way to solve Incline's employee housing needs. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much.
Next, Doug Flaherty, please go ahead and address the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Doug Flaherty, Tahoe here, TahoeCleanAir.org. The proposed code amendments have adopted, as well as past incremental public and private projects, development code changes, and area plan approvals and adoptions since the 2012 regional plan will cumulatively increase adverse environmental impacts, as well as public safety peril, and as well as public safety peril due to human and roadway overcapacity, thereby jeopardizing public safety during a wildfire evacuation. Therefore, the TRPA must prepare a supplemental environmental impact statement to the 2012 regional plan, of which must include discussion of the current proposed code amendment, environmental and safety impacts, and a comprehensive roadway by roadway fire evacuation capacity evaluation driven by accurate and substantial data. Until that time, the proposed amendments must be placed on hold. Secondly, adoption of the proposed amendments is unconstitutional, as TRPA will, upon adoption, and has since the 2012 regional plan, failed in its responsibility under the state of Nevada and California Constitution and the Bi-State Compact to ensure the inalienable right of Lake Tahoe Basin residents and visitors, their safety during a wildfire evacuation. the wording in both constitutions is similar. And finally, the stated outcomes that may be achieved regarding affordability, achievable, or workforce housing are highly controversial, subjective, arbitrary, capricious, and the outcomes that are alleged are highly uncertain. This due to the inability to accurately predict market rate increases and a lack of substantial evidence to justify the outcomes. And finally, TRPA has filled in its responsibility to establish a human and roadway threshold carrying capacity. And TRPA fills in its mission, its statement of mission and purpose to provide for the safety of residents and visitors. All the code sections are called out in my 9-point submission to you. I hope you seriously read it. And I hope that you will turn towards protecting our safety instead of reducing our safety and jeopardizing our safety. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Cindy L. Please go ahead and address the committee.
Yes, hi, my name is Cindy Lockman. I live in Cornelian Bay, and I do find it interesting that only developers who stand to gain financially are the ones that are for these changes. There is a saying in golf, don't follow a bad shot with a stupid shot. And that's kind of what TRPA seems to be doing by allowing all the STRs in our community that has taken away the housing and then using what seems like very irresponsible ideas to solve a problem that could be easily fixed had you not opened the floodgates to allow limitless short-term renters, which started the problem of taking away the housing. 500 square feet for $2,430 a month is not affordable. It is roughly the size of a nice hotel room and probably suitable for one person. A lot of the people who need this housing are families with children who moved up here to work and raise their children in our area and in a safe and beautiful community. And TRPA, I'm so sad and disappointed in what you're doing because it seems like in the last couple of years, you've turned the corner from protecting our environment to protecting developers who want to line their pockets by exploiting our beautiful land. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Next, Julian, please go ahead.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. I did send in comments and I would encourage everyone to read them. They're meant to be constructive. I am a proponent of workforce housing. I'm on the Tahoe Partnership Housing Committee, and I truly am behind these efforts. However, I have serious problems with the reliance on deed restrictions because we do not have in the Tahoe Basin an adequate institution to monitor and enforce deed restrictions. As someone else pointed out in Incline Village, I've heard as many as 96 deed restricted properties, and they have not been adequately monitored or enforced. It is not transparent, and consultants will recommend that you need to have a proper housing authority to deal with deed restriction enforcement. So please, let's put that step of looking into those issues of how do we develop the institutions to make deed restrictions effective. Do not change the development codes before you have looked at that. Secondly, I caught the Cascadia presentation. It was fascinating and helpful, but the reality in Incline Village is our service workers can't afford $2,400 a month, let alone $3,000 a month. I'm looking at our only apartment complex in Incline Village, which is at 786 Southwood. It's owned by something called KG Incline Investors. They have 750 square foot apartments rented for, I understand, about $1,400 to $1,600 a month. And I know for a fact that some of those 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartments house extended families, at least, 8 people. So what the focus has been here on workforce housing at 2,400 to 3,000 something is not going to work for Incline Village. So I would urge TRPA to revisit this, and let's focus on rental housing in our town centers that can be done as public-private partnerships. And finally, please go get the data, do the surveys, find out who your audience is, because I think you will find they are people with kids. They need their cars. They use their cars as part of their work, house cleaning, landscaping, whatever. We need parking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Sharon Kerrigan, please go ahead and address the committee.
Hello, yes, my name is Sharon Kerrigan. I am the Executive Vice President for the South Tahoe Association of Realtors. We represent about 350 realtors in the South Lake Tahoe area on the California side of the South Basin. And we just wanted to commend the City of South Lake Tahoe and the staff of the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency for all of their hard work in reviewing all of these regulations and guidelines. We've been working to address the housing crisis really since it reared its head in 2003. It's kind of been worse, better, worse, better. But we know from the real estate perspective that the only way to make things more affordable for anyone to rent or purchase is to have more supply. It's just supply and demand. It's very simple. And it looks like you are proposing some really workable policies that will enable for some deed restricted properties to be developed or rehabilitated that would really go a long way to addressing the issue of the housing crisis. So we want to say that we support these proposals. We trust that TRPA is going to be doing all of the work to ensure that they're not going to have a negative environmental impact. Or that things are going to be mitigated in some way. And we want to say that we are here to support these efforts and to be a partner in this endeavor. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, there's no further comment.
Thank you very much. Hearing all of the fears from the public make me feel like there's a lot of work to be done for feedback and maybe even more data gathering on this proposal. And I'm sure staff has heard their concerns, but I'd like to open it up to the committee again and see if there's any points you want to make sure that you get on the record as staff continues to develop this and gather community input.
Madam Chair, this is Shelley. I have a question, I guess, for staff, if I may.
Great.
So a number of years ago, and I don't know how many motels were successfully converted into permanent housing, but I'm assuming there's still kind of a plethora of older units that could be potentially rehabilitated that are existing. It's not going to solve the entire crisis, but I think it may allay some of the fears by members of the public that we're just opening the floodgates to new development as opposed to focusing on redevelopment of existing housing stock. I also, and I don't know how doable this is, but people keep bringing up short-term rentals. And I don't know, my sense is a lot of these short-term rentals are owned by people who want to use those homes for maybe a few months out of the year. So the likelihood of them renting it out for an extended period of time to somebody who needs permanent housing is remote. But I don't know the answer to that question. So, and I don't know how we get at that, that data other than to make it incorporated into part of the approval process or licensing for short-term rentals. Having a question on the application that says, how often do you own the property? Is it corporately owned? Is it individually owned? How many months out of the year are you intending to rent it to people who are not a member of your family? And how often do you occupy that home? Because then we could determine what the universe is in terms of short-term rentals that could be used for workforce housing if short-term rentals were severely curtailed or eliminated entirely, because this issue keeps coming up as a solution to affordable housing. But I don't know the answer to that question. And it may be that, a very small percentage of the owners of these short-term rentals would be willing to rent those homes out for an extended period of time because they want to use it for their own purposes. But without that data, we can't put this issue to rest. For once and for all. I suspect some of the short-term rentals that have been built specifically for that purpose, will probably be sold to single-family homeowners, if they're not permitted to rent out those units, because many of them were expensive to build and they probably, they couldn't justify renting them out, to people who can afford a modest rent. So again, I don't want to increase their workload, but I think since that is a reoccurring question, we need an answer as to whether or not that is a viable component of addressing the affordable housing shortage.
Ms. Aldine, I love that. And I will tell you, local governments will need to be asking those questions since we work with the applicants directly, but I know that the Board of County Commissioners is going to be tackling short-term rentals here soon. And it's certainly something that maybe we could even survey our short-term rental folks casually before we add that to the application. So I love that suggestion, and I'll go back to our team, and perhaps TRPA can help get the rest of local governments on board on that.
That would be great. Thank you.
Staff, do you have any other answers to Ms. Aldine's comments?
Well, I just wanted to add, I'm not sure if Mr. Friedrich is still on the phone, but I know that the city of South Lake Tahoe has data because they did ban short-term rentals in most areas. And I believe I heard them mention that about 12% of them converted to long-term rentals. So, but we could get, more, we could probably get that number from them.
Karen, it would be nice to know if those were affordable long-term.
Yeah, great question. And I know when we did our housing study, we found that 14% of our folks who want to live in Incline Village or Crystal Bay were displaced because of short-term rentals. I hear from my constituents, they think it's greater than that, renters wouldn't necessarily know why they were being asked to leave their place that they were leaving their long-term rental, but there's certainly some more data to be collected, and I'm sure the local governments can assist with that. Any other committee members' questions or comments? I'm not hearing any. So the only thing I would say is, staff has brought to us that updating local area plans takes time. And this is something that the board has given direction that they want to see move forward. But I'm so hesitant with where our community is at right now and how they feel, the angst that they feel about these policies. To give staff direction at this moment, I want to have a think about adopting these policies and how we can do some better outreach in the interim before we kind of give that direction, because I do think there's a lot more discussion to be had about the role of TRPA, big questions, transportation, workforce housing, what the issues are in Tahoe, and kind of feeling out the community on their concerns, and what we see as governing board members as some solutions that the community isn't buying. And so I do have a concern about that. And I don't know any committee members have input about that question. Ms. Aldine.
Madam Chair, well, I think it's prudent, to continue to analyze the data, to collect more data and make sure we're on solid ground. I also wanted to bring up one more thing. There was an article that was sent to us by Jeff, kind of an update on articles written about Tahoe related issues, about the fact that Palisades Tahoe has apparently acquired a property in Kings Beach for their housing, for their employees, as opposed to housing them on site. I mean, I don't know how you discourage that from happening, but that just increases VMT. And I think it's been brought up repeatedly that, and Heavenly Valley, I think, has some housing for employees on site. Developing some sort of creative incentive for these folks, to take care of their own, I think is essential. And, the housing that's been acquired by Palisades Tahoe in Kings Beach could be used to house people who are employed in Kings Beach, which would also reduce vehicle miles traveled. So even though the article kind of, congratulated Palisades Tahoe for acquiring the property, I'm sure it just doesn't solve the problem. It just relocates the problem. So again, I think we need to revisit what opportunities we might have. Not, I hate to say from a regulatory standpoint, but, new projects that are proposed, if the ski resorts, if the casinos come back for permitting, maybe that needs to be a condition of the permit, that they figure out some way of providing housing for their employees to minimize the importation of employees from outside the basin.
I hear you there. And I think the idea that I don't think this committee thinks that all these policies are going to solve all the issues. And I think the staff did a really good job of pushing that, even for our low income service workers those who desire to live in the basin, these policies will not address. That needs to be government subsidized and partnership housing. But certainly, looking for staff to look at ways that we can implement these things on even a pilot, process, working with developers on certain projects, because I know there's a real concern about, doing this wholesale is going to change, the basin, and we're not really solving the problem. And so I think, thinking creatively about those things, and exactly what you said, Ms. Aldine, as well, about on-site housing and what that would look like. And even brought up by one of our public commenters, Ms. Julian, she said, so say you do inclusionary zoning and folks can't even pay for the HOA fees, which are quite expensive up in Tahoe. So I think these are things we need to kind of think through. Any other committee members?
Madam Chair, I just support your approach to this issue. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Okay, with that, staff has a lot of direction. Do you feel comfortable moving forward? And maybe we need to have another subcommittee meeting on this. I don't know how y'all feel.
No, I think we have plenty of ideas on the things we need to work on. A lot of it is communication of things that we think are clear, but the public obviously doesn't. Or, for example, we're not talking about more development. We're talking about a different way to use it, to use the cap. Some people mentioned sewer, the basin sewer. You can't do anything without sewers. So there's a lot of those kind of issues. I don't want to go through them all.
Sure.
But there are some demand data and some STR data that Shelley talked about, things like that. We'll work on those. Keep
Great.
going.
Great.
I'll just-
Thank you so much. Yes.
I'll add that we're happy to do another update to this committee and try to get you some of those answers. The big focus of this summer is doing outreach with various groups on this proposal. So I think that's a great idea to try to determine what the biggest issues are that the community is voicing and how we can best address those within this.
And so often we just want to come to the solution, and sometimes we need to have a discussion of what is the problem. And I think that will help all of us, because even this broad, painting Tahoe with a broad brush, it's hard to identify all the problems. There's a lot of concerns and problems. So, really having those hard discussions, I think, will be something that I look forward to doing with the public. And I know that the team's ready to do too. So that sounds great. Well, we will.
The whole purpose of Cascadia's presentation was to give you a new perspective we didn't have.
I
before.
can't hear you. I'm sorry. You'll have to speak a little.
I said that was the whole purpose of doing Cascadia's analysis and bringing you their presentation, was that's a new perspective we haven't had before.
It
So-
is. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so with that, we will move to our committee member comments. And I will just call on each committee member to see if folks have anything to add. Then I'm not sure. I don't think she has anything. Mr. Friedrich, and I think he's actually dropped off. Ms. Lane.
She's
Okay. And Ms. Aldine.
nothing further, thanks.
Okay, Mr. Aguilar.
No comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will now go to our final matter of business, our general public comment period. Any member of the public wishing to address the local government and housing committee on any item listed or not listed on the agenda may do so at this time. Individuals or groups who have already commented on the items listed on the agenda are not permitted to comment on the same topic. The local government and housing committee is prohibited by law from taking immediate action on or discussing issues raised by the public during the public comment period. If any member of the public wishes to speak at this time, please raise your hand now, either in person or by raising the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or dialing *9 on your phone, and you'll be called on and unmuted by a TRPA staff member. Let's start with the room.
Is anybody in the room that would like to make public comment?
I don't know if this is
Elizabeth?
correct. Elizabeth Learnhardt, Zephyr Cove. I don't know if this is the correct form, but I would like to address Ms. Aldine about the VHRs. There is a wealth of knowledge. I just watched the Board of Commissioners meeting about this in Douglas County, and I'm sure there is the same in South Lake Tahoe. Do take advantage of this, because it is a very different scope of economics. If you rent a short-term rental versus a long-term rental, it is a 10 times or more difference in return for the owner. And unless you take that into account, you cannot really assess why these people are hanging on to it with their teeth to want these short-term rentals. And Douglas County has beaten this to death. It's really a sore issue, but they've tried to be fair to everybody, but I don't think there is a solution that combines them. I think Measure T was the way to go for, and it should be for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, we have 4 hands raised online.
Great.
First, we have Cindy Laughlin. Please go ahead and address the committee.
Hi, just one quick thing about the question that could be asked to figure out whether the short-term rentals were or could be used for employee housing or long-term rentals. I think a good question would be, have you ever rented your home out or your property out as a long-term rental? I think that would give you better data. On a separate note, and the whole reason I am here today, I'd like to discuss the Homewood development and just put forth a comment about that I would like the board to consider before they give any more approvals on what's going to happen there. I've been a member of 3 different Discovery Land Company clubs, and I received a sales packet about what a great private opportunity, private and exclusive, which was 2 words that were highlighted throughout the information packet that we received. I've been coming up to Tahoe my entire life. I absolutely love it. I was a Meeks Bay kid. I love the West Shore, and I would strongly encourage you not to allow Discovery and JMA to develop that land in the way they want to do it. I do not believe for 1 second they will have any public access, because it's not logical that they would be able to sell those houses or condos for millions of dollars and offer what in their terms is private and exclusive access, and yet still allow community members to use the facilities. That's never going to happen, I promise you. Just please, please, please don't ruin our West Shore with the developers who are only interested in making money. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Doug Flaherty, please go ahead and address the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Just want to point out that there's certainly been a pattern of attempting to limit increasing public comments and vocalizations of controversial items, certainly here in Washoe County and Incline Village. By the way, Tahoe cleanair.org, Doug Flaherty. Here in our neck of the woods in Washoe, there seems to be a thumb on the button of continuing to decrease not only our local Washoe County commissioner comments, which do tie into the basin, as well as all these various, I think somebody mentioned the number of committees that one of you are on. That's really robbing us, the public, of fair public comment, including committees that are canceled at the last minute, meetings that don't permit public comments and erode our First Amendment rights. And there seems to be a common thread here on the part of at least one commissioner to do that. But also, I believe that you're underestimating the public here. I don't say that as adversarial. I think you guys are living in a world that was started on a path away from environmental protection into other, pro-development processes. And I think you're underestimating the concern out here of the public. I really hope that you give us fair time to comment. Some people work, my comments, I work 10 hours on those. And I felt like after it was mentioned that there was going to be a 2:30 hard stop, that I wouldn't get to, mention my comments, and I was able to. But you guys really have a reputation of dampening down the public, and that started with the last Joanne Marquetta's reign, and now with the new reign, which is nothing more than a clone. So you guys need to think about making some serious changes with regards to hearing the public. Thank you very much.
Next, Ann Nichols, please go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me this time? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, great. Ann Nichols, North Tahoe Preservation Alliance. I really would like it if you didn't start out this, Cascadia, with something that's disingenuous by saying that it's only less than 5% of the total basin area. That's a false comparison. Let's find out what the area of land that's being changed, town centers and outside town centers, in relation to the total developed land area. Obviously the basin's huge. I mean, does that seem fair to you? Immediately you go like, oh, well, these people are just going to be lying to us, So it would just be a better, and then a lot of these presentations start out with, well, the population's down. We, using 2020 census pre-COVID, I know the Crystal Bay Post Office has 600 PO boxes now, and they had pre-COVID 300. So, and we know, I think there's over 3,000 new PO boxes in Tahoe. So let's be right on with that. That would be more fair. And I really appreciate Ms. Aldine's comments on building the big employers building on their own property. It's just so right on. And then, the two-step process of making multifamily into condos, you got to get rid of that right away. And I guess it is unfair to all the people that have gotten away with it already. And I know Ms. Aldine had said, well, that's the way for people to be able to buy their own units. Well, not when they become luxury units. So the two-step process is what got us into this fix. And I don't think it's fair to have the public pay for it now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Next, Ellie Waller, go ahead, Ellie.
Hi, this is Ellie.
What?
Ms. Waller, you cut off.
Ellie?
Okay, am I there?
Yep.
You
Okay.
are. I hear you now.
Okay, thank you. Lots of us spend lots of time on comments. And I want to thank Karen for taking the time to answer in different arenas and the things that she's trying to answer. But
No shit.
Ms. Waller, you muted yourself again. We can't hear you.
okay, I'm not touching anything.
Okay. Okay.
So,
Well, we can hear you now.
Anyway, okay, so lots of us spend lots of time on comments. I want to thank Karen for answering comments as quickly as she can. I know her plate's full, but I sent in 6 pages, got lots of questions for just today's committee. And I know that staff time is invaluable, but so are the public's. And some of these questions need to be answered. And I'm hoping we can get more of that in the future. There's so many issues involved with the updating of the area plans. Everybody, every jurisdiction needs to take these very seriously. And the public that participates in the arduous process does not get heard all the time. As I said earlier, our original Placer Tahoe Basin Area Plan, we were given the maximum heights, and that's just not acceptable for the future. Also, I'd like to see a matrix of what the Tahoe Living Group Housing Community Revitalization Group does differently than what you get as the local government people, and what you're handling, and how things traverse between the two groups, and of course a better explanation of how the Tahoe Living Group was selected. I won't go through all the questions I have in here. I really appreciate the time, and I'm hoping you read the comments. I put at the end, we can't really build out our way out of this crisis. This is from the Civil Beat in Hawaii. They're having the same problems. This is nationally a systemic problem, and by filling every square inch of property in Lake Tahoe is not the solution either. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have no name, but phone number ends in 2100.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, this is Niobe Burden Austere, and I'm a homeowner in Tahoe Vista. I have been away from Tahoe for 10 years, living overseas. I provided a few things in my public comment regarding things I've seen from overseas that might be helpful for us, meeting some of the thresholds, having visualizations of projects and so forth. Just wanted to point that out. I also wanted to say the other things in my public comment that I'm hoping will be addressed by TRPA is I've gone onto the website and seen, the threshold updates were from 2019. I'm assuming all those threshold updates are going to be current this year, as they're supposed to be required every 4 years. And in those 2019 thresholds, only 2 out of the 10 had been met. So I'm just, without having these studies updated and meeting the thresholds, I don't understand why these amendments for density, increased density, are even being considered until more studies are done. Also with the, I've looked into CEQA and NEPA and some of the requirements of that the TRPA is supposed to be instituting. One of those is obviously roadway traffic and then in regards to density again, it's important that there is a roadway by roadway study for fire evacuation, and a real concern considering what we've gone through the last couple of years. I was away, but I heard a lot and I've seen a lot of pictures and media and friends ahead sent me. So very concerning. I do want to thank you for coming up with those suggestions about employers, having housing, requiring incentives of some sort to have employers have housing online, and also looking into the SDRs and what's happening, how many of those SDR owners would consider long-term rentals. And then also, I think we should be monitoring and enforcing those past projects that may have had a housing component, which aren't doing that housing component. I think Tonopalo is one of those. I worked with Tonopalo back in the very beginning as a photographer, and I don't understand, I thought there was a housing component with that project. I don't see that that's happened. I think, let's see, the suggestion of rental housing projects being for redevelopment in hotels and things that are now, an eyesore in some of these communities, become public and private partnerships together with the current owners, if they're open to that, doing surveys with the current property owners as to what incentives they see would be an incentive to them to do something with their properties. I think is important, and maybe it'd be a good way to get some more housing as well. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Next, Leah Kaufman. Leah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. I just wanted to give a brief description of my background. I'm a 40-year Lake Tahoe Basin land planner. I thought I could retire, but I've just been so distressed by some of the things and changes that TRPA has made since I was an employee there many years ago that I kind of came out of retirement. Some of the issues that are facing us have not been addressed by TRPA, and that is community character. Community character is not homogenizing into North Star or Palisades type villages. Community character is a compilation of the sum of many parts, and that's a consideration of the existing natural environment in conjunction with its built surroundings, cultural, historic, landscape, resources, natural features, existing community character, density, coverage, architecture style, colors, materials, massing, height, density, roof pitch, tree preservation, compatibility, unity, cohesiveness, etc. In the recent hearing held on the 8th for a 14,000 square foot home that is being proposed in the Meeks Bay area of iconic 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s homes, there was no discussion in the TRPA about character. There was no discussion about what used to happen with historic resources, and you can read my letter. It will pretty much say what happened in that meeting. I am concerned because there are lots of areas outside town centers with 5-acre parcels. We have been looking at this for 12,000 square feet, but we have 4- and 5-acre parcels. So right there, that would be hundreds and hundreds of units. It would be heights that do not currently exist. It would be density and coverage and tree removal that doesn't currently exist. It's very distressing. The other thing is there needs to be a uniform policy basis, both California and Nevada, to address affordable, achievable, etc. first. Community character, the achievable housing that's fair, the larger employees, what Shelley said, having to put their projects, affordable projects on site. I like the comments, Alexis, that you want to go out and increase the public input as to what they feel about this. And And I like what Ann and Ellie and Stacy Baker and Cindy Laughlin and Niobe and Doug and everybody else who spends hours working on this. So I urge you to take your time and listen to the public. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Sue, if you'd like to go ahead and address the committee. Sue, can you unmute yourself?
I think I did it. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sue Daniels, local realtor and resident since 1958. Wanted to just speak to a couple of things, especially because my hand wasn't called during the regular meeting, and I'm sorry, I'm doing it in public comment now. But Shelley Aldean did ask a little bit about short-term rental and the impact on housing. And as a realtor for the last 35 years, and especially working in the pandemic area, and since short-term rentals have come on to be such a big thing, they've really changed the dynamics of our market. I do agree a bit with what Sharon spoke of earlier for the South Lake Tahoe Association of Realtors, but with a caveat to the fact that we've done studies with mountain housing and found that short-term rentals do take up approximately 18 to 20% of the available second home housing that could go to our long-term workforce housing. But bigger than that is the fact that when buyers are in the market, they will pay upwards to 20% higher than the list price because they know they can make the money back by turning a single family zoned house into a business. It's an economic choice, which is just knocking out all of your affordable and workforce housing, taking it away from the local workforce. This is a big socio-economical problem that has been created by our counties allowing businesses to come into neighborhoods, and we're turning homes into motels. We're having all of the side businesses that go along with that, vacation management, hot tubs, you know, the whole cleaning services and everything that goes along with running a motel. That has really changed the dynamics of what's affordable to our local workforce. And we should go back to looking at our stock that we already have here in the basin and using it right. There is data on this, and it will turn economics back down, which maybe that's a leveling thing that the society needs. One other comment that I wanted to speak of is when you're reducing parking and automobile access, you're restricting access to seniors and handicapped people. And I would be very careful to the fact that we don't want to make places that don't have parking allowed and don't allow vehicles, because you're locking out a huge segment of the population. So those would be my comments I wanted to make earlier. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Jackson Riello. Please go ahead and address the committee.
Now I can.
Hello there, can you guys hear me?
I've been waiting for an hour.
Oh, Sue, can you mute yourself? Thank you. Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Rial.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Hi there, my name is Jackson Riallo. I work as a land use planning consultant here within the Tahoe Basin, but I'm not here representing any type of project or on a work capacity. I'm here as a South Lake Tahoe resident who would like to speak to some of the issues with kind of some of the background kind of expertise and knowledge that I have from my work. So I'd like to start by saying thank you to all of the TRPA staff and to the members of the committee for all your hard work in trying to figure out and resolve our housing crisis that we're experiencing within the basin. I know it's a really challenging task, and you're facing a lot of community members that do not understand what the underlying issues are and how to address them. So thank you guys for all of your efforts in trying to resolve these issues. Being conscious of time, I just want to say that broadly speaking, I am in full support of the code amendments that are being proposed by TRPA that were presented on today. I think really what I would like to use the remainder of my public comment time is kind of beginning by setting the context of what is quote unquote the public. We hear that this a lot in these community meetings, that the public is speaking. I think it's really important to note that this is not actually representative of our public population in our communities. These are people who have free time on their hands that are able to come and attend these meetings and be civically engaged in these processes, while the people who do not have housing and who are suffering are busy at work and are not able to attend these meetings and speak what they need as a part of these processes. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of that context to the committee members. Additionally, I just wanted to say that there are literally hundreds of public studies available that show that the housing crises that are not being just experienced in mountain communities, but across the entirety of the country are due to the single family residential zoning districts and the development standards that are placed upon those zoning districts. This is an issue across the country, not just in our communities, but because of our unique circumstances, it is increasingly exacerbated because of this. So while you have members of quote unquote the public making these public comments, they already have their nest egg and have their single family residential house and have had it for a long time, while people who are working in the community are unable to house themselves. The last thing that I wanted to just note as a South Lake Tahoe resident is I moved to the South Lake Tahoe about 5 years ago. I live and work in South Lake Tahoe. I work a professional level job, and I will not be able to afford a house for myself or for a future family that I would like to start in South Lake Tahoe for at least a decade, given the housing market as it stands today. So I know my time is up. I just want to thank everyone again for your time. Thank you.
Madam Chair, there's no further public comment.
Thank you. Before I close public comment, I just want to throw it over to Julie and see if you have or staff to see if you have any closing comments for the public before we adjourn.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Julie Reagan, TRPA Executive Director. I just really wanted to thank the community members who did speak out today, and just to reassure the public that we do read the letters. We do take the public comments very seriously. I am doing another coffee talk on the North Shore at the Tahoe Center, Tahoe City Public Utility District next Thursday, the 22nd at 9 a.m. And people are welcome to come and to dive into some of these issues deeper. We know these are incredibly difficult issues, but I do want to assure those who do ask questions that our staff members work really hard, like Karen, like Alyssa, to do the research to answer these questions, and we'll continue to do so. And our staff live in this community too. And the last commenter really struck a chord with me, because I think we really have lost sight that there is housing that is substandard in our community. It's not acceptable. And we need to work on that together. And it's a national problem, but our community here in Tahoe, with the regional plan, we have a role to play in that. And that's what the whole purpose of this discussion was for today. So really thank you all for your attention. And thank you, Madam Chair, for being in Washington on business and extending into the evening to extend this meeting. We all very much appreciate it.
My pleasure, and I agree with you. Hearing from the public is very important, and I think, like I said, I think that the public's been asking since I got on the TRPA board for a broader discussion, and I think that there may be ways we can structure some of those with different constituencies around the lake, and make sure that we understand all of the issues, and before we come up with all of our solutions, even though that's what we all want to do very quickly. So I will now close the public comment, and our last item is adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you very much. And meeting, I don't have to, oh, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned at 6:27. Thank you all.